Okay, what I want to do now is really, perhaps the more fun part, is really looking at how do all of these ideas relate to how we can transform the most maligned landscape and the home for, in fact, most Australians, and that's really suburbia. There's been a lot said, especially in the peak oil movement, that suburbia is a finished landscape. But that's really come on the back of 30 years of planners regarding it as a dysfunctional landscape. I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I think it's really important that we understand the history and the obstacles that we're facing. But we also need to read the landscape and its resources and sidestep the obstacles and grasp the opportunities. In permaculture, we say we need to turn the problem into the solution. So let's start at the beginning. Suburbia in the 1950s, the typical elements of suburban living were the single income, really about $250 a week in today's money, a housewife and 3 children, so family size typically, household size typically 5, 12 square house on a quarter-acre block, 1,000 square metres. And I think that generation were very much house proud and still had the culture of self-reliance and domestic frugality as a result of the experience of the Depression and the Second World War. The veggies, the fruit trees, the chooks, the septic tank actually was part of that self-reliance, and the lawn was really the symbol of the new leisure and wealth. We can think of the consumer icons of cleanliness, leisure and mobility. The Hills hoist, the Victor lawnmower, which somehow has been transformed into a symbol of drudgery and work. But the lawn, of course, was this great statement, in a way, about not having to be a complete peasant growing food. It was about leisure and relaxation. And, of course, the most important one of all, the symbol of mobility. The foundations for the growth of suburbia, the post-war economic boom of the 50s, was based on cheap and abundant fossil fuel and timber. And of course Australia was riding on the sheep's back. In 1950, wool was $2.40 a kilo. That's without adjustment for inflation. It's staggering how rich farmers really were then. War service homes and low interest loans, and the public infrastructure for suburban growth, sealed roads, power, water supply and sewerage. Actually, that picture of a sewer being installed in Bicton, where I grew up, I seem to remember in the 1960s, actually the men dug the trench with shovels. So how did this play out in the average street? This is Aussie Street, number 1, 2, 3 and 4, and I want to paint a little scenario of how this developed and how it could develop. The 14 square brick and tile war service home with a porch on the front and the veranda out the back on the quarter-acre block. Married couple with no kids in the first house, they've got the shed out the back, of course, every bloke has to have the shed, and there's the Hills hoist, and the garage and the new car. And of course there's the chook pen and the veggie garden and some fruit trees and of course the lawn and the ornamental garden out the front. At number 2, there's a married couple with 3 kids, and of course they've got the shed and the Hills hoist, a carport on the side of the house and a car, more extensive veggie garden and fruit trees, a little bit less lawn and the ornamental garden. At number 3, there's a married couple that end up with 5 kids there, and he's actually a mechanic, and he's got a garage down the back and works from home. They've actually got 2 cars, being a mechanic. And they've got the hills hoist, but they're not much in the way of gardeners. They've got a sort of fairly minimalist garden. At number 4, there's another couple with 3 kids, and they're actually Italians, I think. And they've got the biggest veggie garden of all, and more fruit trees. They've still got the lawn, but they've got a sort of bit of a funny front garden that's all full of olive trees. Anyway, in this, the golden age of suburbia, there's 19 people on this bit of real estate with an amazingly small amount of built area. And if we multiplied the number of people by the area of housing and then looked at the occupancy rate, we would see that, in fact, this was a very active place. I suppose my early environmental awareness was really against a background of this living design. And I came in my early teens to regard this form of living as the most extravagant, resource-consuming way of life that had ever been invented. Of course, I was perfectly correct in that analysis. But by the late 1990s, I was teaching in permaculture design courses that the suburbia of the 50s might be a model of sustainability that we could aspire to. So, how did that develop and eventuate? In the 60s and the 70s was the rising affluence and addition. So at number 1 in the 60s, they enclosed the back veranda. And at number 2, they got a new car. And at number 3, they enclosed the back veranda and got a new car. And at number 4, they actually got a car for the first time. I didn't point out that they actually didn't have a car at all to start with. Okay, and then down the back, the sewerage was put in and the septic tanks were replaced. Great improvement, where people didn't have to worry about it at all, just flush it away and the authorities take responsibility for it all. Another aspect of self-reliance that was done away with. And of course the curb and channel along the street, which accelerated the stormwater away down to the local wetland. And the other environmental improvement, I suppose, was the council planted native trees along what became called the nature strip. Very strange terminology. So, but what's happened here? Actually, the mechanic split. He's left with a floozy, and mum and the 5 kids are left behind trying to handle the mortgage. Well, they end up leaving. And new owners move in who've also got 3 kids with a new car. And they're really keen on native gardens, and they plant stuff all over the place. Gum trees and shrubs. And yeah, even gum trees and shrubs, native shrubs out the front garden. And build the double garage games room up the back and concrete the driveway. Well, what's happened? The hills hoists disappeared. Oh, well, actually the gum tree was, the big gum tree in the backyard was shading it and dumping all the leaves on it, so they got a clothes dryer instead. I don't know what's happened to the Italians, but they've actually given up the fruit trees in the backyard and done a huge addition to the house, and all that's left of the olive grove is one solitary olive in the front. But they have had a raging dispute with the neighbours, and they've now planted a great hedge along the side. So the people count is down to 17 at this stage. So how does this express itself when we look at the wider society? Of course, urban sprawl involved the poor use of public infrastructure. Sewerage systems are really supporting very low densities of population, car-based transport, loss of agricultural land. The problems were also in terms of dysfunctional economies, huge unproductive capital investment, enormous amount of society's wealth basically invested in something that's not really producing anything. Speculative land values, the idea that it just keeps rising in value indefinitely. And the decline of household production, not just food, but also home crafts, maintenance, and other aspects, important aspects of the household economy. Household debt and consumer addiction developing. And the development of what became called dormitory suburbs, where basically with declining household size and empty houses and streets, lack of community and increased crime. So what are the conventional responses been to these problems? Well, on the planning front, we've had planning regulations to encourage increasing density. Density increase has become virtually a reason for existence for large numbers of the planning profession. All their life, that's what the purpose of their profession has been. And that's been through a whole lot of different instruments. Smaller house blocks, 500 square metres. Dual occupancy, double the monocultural design, fill in every backyard. Perhaps one of the most poorly thought out aspects of this increased density idea. Medium density redevelopment, knock it all down and start again. But the responses have also come in terms of lifestyle. We've had the holidays away, escaping from it. The live-out mobile lifestyle, where people have got it all at home under lock and key, but they're out and about in their cars using other public resources, effectively making our cities increasingly full of people going between buildings under lock and key. Our cities are not really full of people at all, they're full of empty buildings. The renovation obsession, constantly redoing things. And the move to the inner city, apartment living, and the move to country living, creating effectively the super suburb. We've also seen environmental responses to these problems. Improved public transport. Well, actually, I don't think that is a picture of Perth's latest, it's actually Basel, Switzerland. But the idea, and of course in this city there's been very serious improvements since I lived here in the 1960s, when I used to describe Perth as the Los Angeles of Australia in terms of car dependence. Building insulation and energy efficiency, serious changes. In the cold capitals of Australia, in Canberra, Melbourne, Hobart, in the 1960s, virtually none of the housing stock was insulated to any great degree. Virtually all of it is now. A huge achievement. Unfortunately, energy consumption in that period for heating has actually gone up. Urban green space, water-sensitive urban design, native landscaping for water conservation and biodiversity. So these have been attempts to deal with some of these issues. And how has this sort of really played out back in Aussie Street? Well, we've now got an elderly couple who, of course, don't have any kids at number one. Things are getting fairly tough, and they've really given up the food garden now, and it's returned to an unirrigated mown grass up the back. And in number two, we've got an elderly couple that's moving to a nursing home. And the gum tree out the front isn't looking too good either, actually. It's on the way out, it's dying. At number three, there's the empty nest baby boomers there, and they're retiring to Queensland. Well, at least if this is Melbourne. The gum trees have got pretty huge by this stage. They've sort of covered the whole place. And at number four, a new developer's bought the house, knocked down the garden and the carport, and put a 180 square metre brick veneer in the backyard. Of course, there's the carport and the concreted area virtually paving the whole block, and then the council's made them put in the stormwater detention tank so they don't overload the stormwater system. and the developers put in a nice drip irrigated ornamental garden. And in the front house there's now a separated working mother with 2 teenage kids who are pretty much couch potatoes renting there, and the young working couple with no kids in the back. And the people count's down to 11. So we've got this huge increase in built area in infrastructure, and there's actually less people there, and they're actually spending less time there as well. So what do we do if available energy is actually in decline? This is clearly going to, a falling energy base will change things on many fronts, and it'll expand a lot of the symptoms in terms of services, food supply, water supply, over a period of decades. It'll bring a lot of the problems home in all sorts of different forms: terrorism, refugees, recessions. And it'll make current urban design strategies ineffective. But the positives of energy descent are quite substantial because it'll drive creative adaptation and innovation. It'll help overcome obsessions and addictions, and it'll renew community spirit and solidarity. So what are the prospects for Suburbia? Is it the end of Suburbia or the retrofit? Home-based work, telecommuting, cottage industries, extended families, lodges and shared households. The fertile soils, water supply and infrastructure for urban agriculture. Our Australian cities are capable of producing excess perishable food production, more than they need to consume. There's plenty of evidence that that is possible. The possibility to recycle stormwater and human waste. City farms, CSAs, farmers markets. So let's paint the picture of how this could be happening now, starting now in Aussie Street. The 2 houses up for sale in the middle. Number 2 is completely unmodified, the original 1950s house. Pretty cheap, and a young couple with a baby move in after a bit of inheritance, managing to get a loan to build it, to buy it. And they start immediately modifying things. He's a mad permy gardener, and he starts a home nursery in the carport, and he's got all his stock out along the driveway, actually selling plants. He doesn't actually have a permit for a business from the local council, but he's starting anyway. And they start modifying the garden. They don't have a lot of money, but they put up the chook run and tool shed at the back and the straw yard, and they start some serious production vegetable garden to actually sell boxes to neighbours and friends. The water tank on the house for rainwater is the first priority. As they get a bit more money, a larger tank to store more water, greenhouse, shade house, etc. Fill in the back with more fruit trees with a chook run. And there's the perennials out the front and the 2 fruit trees on the street verge. And then they do this little modification to the curb and channeling to divert the storm water onto the fruit trees. Again, they don't have permission for a tiny little bit of concrete in the curb gutter, which actually diverts the water. But it is actually following the latest in urban stormwater design principles, so it's okay. Okay, well, they're looking over the fence, and there's this place next door, and actually a friend of theirs, his parents are moving back. Actually, this is in Melbourne, and they're moving back to Melbourne because their ageing parents are needing care. And so they all move in. The son, who's just come back from time away in Europe, and the parents move into the house next door. And The son's a bit of a tech head and converts the big double garage up the back to a metalworking shop, and they put photovoltaic panels with grid feedback system on the back. The parents have got a bit of money, and they decide to take down the dividing fence and use the big driveway as a common access driveway into both blocks. But the gum trees are really a bit of a problem. They're blocking all the sunlight, stopping solar access. They're using all the water. The soil's pretty impossible to grow things, so they do the logging operation and end up with a big stack of firewood. There's some planting up the back, and they get a serious big rainwater tank in and a grey water reed bed that's actually taking the grey water from both houses. And they're pumping that back across mainly to the food production system. And then they do the 12 square eco retrofit, fully passive solar, and a few other things, grape pergolas and various bits of landscaping. And they take in a lodger, a boarder, who's actually a young single mum with a baby. Now at this stage, there's actually nothing happening between the son and the young mother, but you never know what's going to happen there. And anyway, they realise the porch out the front's sort of half falling off, and they turn it into a little attached greenhouse entry space, which actually improves the performance of the old part of the house enormously in terms of winter thermal efficiency. And they've got a fern garden out the back in the shaded place that there's this cool air source for their cool cupboard inside the house. That means they've reduced their refrigeration substantially. And they build this big bread oven out the front because they've got all that wood to burn, of course, and the young people are starting street parties and whatever, so they do that out the front. And there's the little more modest veggie garden. They're not so much into the food production, but then the bloke next door, he actually sort of manages it for them anyway. And then there was a problem with the front garden. Really, the big gum tree on the street was really taking all the water, and mysteriously it died also. Anyway, they planted fruit trees out the front as well, and repeated the stormwater runoff system. And then there was the nut trees down the driveway, but hell, what's happened? The Hills Hoist has made a return. There's been a negotiation. The market gardeners had to concede a small area of lawn because the two mothers want their babies to be able to crawl around on a bit of lawn, so the vegetable production systems had to contract a bit. And the compost bays up the back with the access. Well, the young folks, they don't have much money, but they did see how effective the little attached greenhouse was at improving the thermal performance of the house, so they did one of those as well. The people count's up to 15. But what happens next? Where can this process go? How can this build and grow in some organic way? Well, the elderly couple next door are still hanging on. They don't want to move, and but they really need home care help. And the young mother next door, she gets a subsidy from the government for home care to help them, and they donate their backyard to the husband, who's desperate for room to expand his box scheme. So number one, if you like, is ripe for colonisation in a very positive way, and happens pretty early in the piece. If we look at number 4, it's a little bit of a harder nut to crack in terms of both the design system and the social profile. Mum's still working flat out, and the teenagers are sort of getting more buried in the computers, and the young couple up the back, they don't seem to want to talk to neighbours at all, and the whole place is covered with concrete. But gee, that stormwater detention system, there's got to be a way of working that as a water recovery system. somehow and all that roof area. So maybe that the situation at number 4 will have to wait for the energy descent scenario to advance a little further. The point of this is really to show that it is possible within the suburban fabric for incremental adaptive change to start now. It's not possible to do that in high density cities, because you have to wait for the whole of society and its structures to agree that we have to change radically what we are doing. And that it's also much more technically difficult to change our high density cities. Our suburbs are actually set up for this possible retrofit, which can start from individuals, from people, from communities building this up. We don't have to wait for governments. Everyone really did understand that permaculture is a subversive process. I think we can see very clearly. We need to kickstart the relocalisation of our communities and economies. I think there's some imperatives to network for inspiration and information, to get producing and support local producers. Food is really the most central issue, not mobility in the long term. We need to involve kids and their friends, make contact with neighbours and barter. We need to review what we really need and reduce consumption. And the possibility of sharing our places, taking in a lodger. There could be a campaign, a lodger, a boarder. This is what was done. All owners in the past got some additional income by having someone share the house. As well as being good for helping to pay off the mortgage, this is the most significant thing homeowners could do to improve the community and the environment. Better use of public infrastructure, better community surveillance, rebuilding the household and community economies. A serious analysis would show this is one of the most effective policies we could do. But it won't actually help the building industry at all. It won't help really the tax base that much. It'll build the household and community economy. And of course, there's all sorts of deep personal privacy and power issues that need to be overcome. Sharing your car, carpooling and picking up hitchhikers. Apart from the 4-fold increase in fuel efficiency that this can achieve, this is actually, there's another level to this strategy, which is actually to get people talking to each other, trusting each other, these informal connections which are essential in dealing with this energy descent future to avoid the path into fear and fascism. And we need to creatively work around regulatory impediments. We can't expect to go to regulatory authorities and say, please, can we have permission to do this, when it actually isn't on the list? Because all bureaucracies can do is tick boxes. No one is making any professional assessment or judgment. Even when they're paid $100,000 a year, all they can do is tick boxes. So it is often better to try and honestly and seriously look at what is responsible socially to do and connect with the other people who might be affected by what we do, because for a start they're the source of complaints that authorities react to, and build that capacity to do things, to put the models in place, and of course always be prepared to apologise and recognise the very important job that regulators do in our society. Perhaps the last one is really the most serious one, and I think there are some very serious issues. How do we pay off debt? And I think people need to look at this very seriously, because the vulnerability of this whole system, of course, is around debt. And I think sometimes that involves the hard decisions to say we will sell out of this house and buy a more modest house in a cheaper place. The other one that I've already mentioned is get more people helping to pay that off. Also, of course, the work from home strategy. We're not really using the capacity, the possibility to work from home that's there. So I really want to present this as a positive pathway that we can see suburbia as actually an opportunity rather than a lost cause. And I would end with the fact that we have to retrofit for the future, not speculative gain. Thank you very much.